first time I saw my brother-in-law serving pumpkin-spiced lattes in a scarecrow costume with a badge that read, "Financially plowed." I laughed until tears ran down my face, and I had to brace myself against a hay bale. The late October sun glinted off the orange and yellow bunting strung between the barn and the ticket booth, and the air smelled of cider and damp earth, and the sugary burn of kettle corn from a vendor cart 20 feet away. A woman in a Kentucky Wildcats hoodie was snapping a photo with her phone, while Tom stood rigid behind the register, straw poking from his cuffs, his face a frozen mask of impotent rage. That was 4 months after I pried open a rusted cash box my sister had hidden in the attic rafters, a box Tom tossed in the trash without a second glance, a box that contained a short handwritten note. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and he's already planning to take everything. Don't trust him. Record everything." I didn't know then that those 5 sentences would lead me through a labyrinth of forged signatures, predatory refinancing, a staged medical crisis, and a bank-safe deposit box rigged with a biometric dead man's switch, and that I would end up owning the entire 40-acre farm, voiding a fraudulent sale, and condemning the man who tried to evict me to a lifetime of seasonal humiliation behind the register of a pumpkin patch I christened Gourd of Deceit. But every single piece of that strange, satisfying puzzle is true, and it all started with a saddle cinch snapping on a Tuesday in April. My name is Helen O'Mara, and at the time this started, I was a 58-year-old retired dental hygienist who ran a small residential cleaning service on the side, Helen's Helping Hands, a business I built from nothing after my husband Marcus passed 11 years ago from pancreatic cancer. We never had children, and after he died, I poured my need to nurture into my clients, most of them elderly widows and widowers in the neighborhoods around Louisville who needed more than just a clean house. They needed someone to notice when the milk was sour or the thermostat was set too low. I'd change light bulbs, snake drains, organize medication, and listen to their stories over cups of weak decaf. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it gave me a sense of purpose I desperately needed. The one steady compass point in my life was my younger sister Claire. She was 6 years younger, bright and impulsive and too trusting, and she married Tom Aldridge 22 years ago after a whirlwind courtship at the Kentucky State Fair, where he won her a stuffed pony by knocking over milk bottles with a baseball that I later learned was weighted. He was handsome and charming in a way that made my skin prickle, all big plans and no follow-through. A man who could sell a space heater to a man in hell, but couldn't hold a steady job because every employer eventually noticed. He spent more time on his phone than on the task at hand. Over 2 decades, he bounced through 6 failed ventures. A pressure washing business that lasted 1 summer, a vending machine route he bought sight unseen and abandoned after 3 months, a mobile car detailing trailer that ended up repossessed, a franchise sandwich shop that closed owing back rent, and even a brief attempt at selling timeshares in Florida that got him banned from a Hilton. Claire stood beside him every time, her teacher's salary stretching thinner each year, her face growing more tired, her laugh more brittle. They bought a 40-acre dairy farm 45 minutes outside Louisville, a place with a sagging white farmhouse, a gambrel-roofed red barn that hadn't housed an actual dairy cow in years, and a second mortgage that mushroomed because Tom couldn't keep a job and every emergency went on a credit card. I taught Claire how to balance a checkbook when we were teenagers, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor with a green ledger and a stack of deposit slips, and that small lesson was the reason she later saw through some of Tom's creative accounting. That detail mattered more than I ever expected, because it was the seed of her quiet, desperate plan. 5 years before Claire died, I did something that changed the legal and emotional architecture of our family. The second mortgage on the farm had ballooned to $95,000, the adjustable rate had spiked, and the bank was inches from filing a notice of default. Claire called me crying, her voice shaking, and I could hear Tom in the background shouting about how it wasn't his fault, how the economy was rigged, how the bank was predatory. I had just liquidated my retirement IRA, $112,000 I'd been feeding for 30 years, because I was planning to buy a small condo outright and live on Social Security and my cleaning income. Instead, I drove to the bank the next morning and obtained a cashier's check for $95,000 payable to the mortgage servicer. But I wasn't a fool. I insisted on a contract, and Claire, bless her heart, insisted on a lawyer of her own choosing, a sharp woman named Evelyn Croft, who worked out of a small office above a bakery in Shelbyville. Evelyn drafted a document that was airtight, a notarized life estate agreement granting me sole and exclusive right to occupy the east wing of the farmhouse, a 3-room suite with its own bathroom and entrance, for the remainder of my natural life, with the additional clause that upon Tom's death, the entire 40-acre property would pass to me in fee simple. The contract could not be terminated, modified, or superseded without my explicit, notarized written consent, and a record of that consent had to be filed with the county clerk within 10 days to be valid. Tom signed it with a grin and a joke about how I'd outlive him anyway, and Vanessa, who was just a girlfriend back then, wasn't even in the picture publicly. The check cleared. The mortgage was satisfied, and I tucked that contract into a fireproof safe in my condo, believing that I had secured my sister's future and my own. Claire died on a Tuesday in late April. A saddle cinch snapped during an afternoon trail ride. She hit her head on a rock, and an aneurysm she never knew she had bled her out before the ambulance arrived. I can still hear the flat, rehearsed tone of Tom's voice when he called me, measuring his words as if he'd practiced them in front of a mirror. By Thursday evening, the funeral was over, a small service at the Methodist church with sad casseroles and too many flowers, and by Friday morning, the vultures were circling. Tom's girlfriend Vanessa materialized in the kitchen before I had even finished my coffee, a real estate agent with bleached, layered hair and a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. She had already rehung the curtains and moved the sofa and was talking about streamlining the estate, as if Claire's body were not even cold, as if her toothbrush wasn't still in the holder and her jacket wasn't draped over the banister. Tom, the golden boy who could do no wrong in my late parents' eyes, sat at the head of the table, nodding along as if Vanessa were reading a quarterly report. They told me they wanted to take care of me, that I should not worry my little head about legal details, that they would handle everything. I was too numb to argue, too raw to see the machinery already turning behind their eyes. I wandered upstairs to the attic to find an old photo album, a green cloth book my mother had kept with pictures of us as girls, and that is when I noticed Claire's wooden sewing box, hand-painted with daisies, lying in a pile of things Tom had already designated for the dumpster. An old lamp, a box of mismatched silverware, a pile of musty curtains, and this little box with a broken clasp. I picked it up and Tom, passing in the hallway, waved a hand and said, "That old junk? Just toss it." He was already on his phone, his voice dropping into a wheedling, fawning tone as he walked downstairs. I waited until they were on the back porch debating which wine to open, their voices drifting up through the open window. Then I carried the box to my car and tucked it under the floor mat. That night, alone in my small rental condo with the sound of my own breathing, I turned the box over in my hands. The wood was cool and smooth, the daisies faded, the clasp rusted shut. I worked a butter knife under the lid and pried it gently until it popped open with a small crack. Inside were spools of thread, a pincushion shaped like a tomato with little green felt leaves, a packet of needles, and a false bottom made of thin plywood that shifted under my thumbnail. I lifted it. Beneath sat a gray steel cash box, solid and heavy, with a 3-digit combination lock. I tried our childhood code, the date of our mother's birthday, September 14, 0914. The lock clicked open. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the box on my kitchen table. Inside were a bundle of documents, a small digital audio recorder disguised as a USB drive with a tiny lens, and a note in Claire's neat cursive handwriting on yellow legal paper. It read, "Do not trust Tom. He's already trying to borrow against the farm behind my back. I've made arrangements to protect you if anything happens. The camera is charged. Use it. Save yourself." Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family should never mean blind loyalty. I sat on my bed and read the note 7 times, my hands trembling so badly the paper rattled against my knee. I plugged the recorder into my laptop and discovered it was a miniature camera, motion-activated, with a battery that Claire had fully charged and a 32-gigabyte memory card already inserted. The first file on the card was a video. I clicked it and there was Claire, sitting at her own kitchen table, looking tired but calm. She spoke to me directly. Helen, if you're seeing this, I'm probably gone. I can't explain everything, but Tom has been running up debts. I found a refinancing application with your name forged as a co-signer. I stopped it, but he'll try again. I've put safeguards in place, but you have to be smart. Use the camera, document everything, and go see Mrs. Patterson at the branch on Main Street. She knows I love you. The video ended. I played it twice more, my tears dripping onto the keyboard, and then I tucked the cash box into a locked trunk in my closet. I did not sleep that night. I memorized every word of her note and every intonation of her voice, and then I began to plan. The next morning I drove back to the farm to play the role of a grief-fogged older sister, a woman too broken to notice the knife sliding between her ribs. Tom and Vanessa greeted me with a breakfast of store-bought danishes and a stack of papers they called, just a few formalities to settle Claire's affairs. The key document was a quitclaim deed that would surrender my life estate in the east wing of the farmhouse. I had held that life estate for 5 years, ever since I drained my entire retirement fund for them, and now here it was, a single page with a signature line and a little arrow sticker flagging where I should sign. Vanessa passed me a pen and said with sugary condescension, "We just need to clean this up so we can handle the insurance. It's meaningless paperwork, honey." I stared at the document and let my eyes go unfocused, my mouth slack. I mumbled something about being too tired to read, too confused to sign anything today, maybe tomorrow. Tom's jaw tightened, but he forced a gentle smile and said, "Of course, Helen. Take your time. We're just trying to protect you." I could see the frustration in the way his fingers drummed on the table, but I let my head loll slightly, playing up the exhaustion. They pressed me again 3 days later, and again the following week, each time with a new variation. Once Vanessa brought a notary to the house unannounced, a nervous young woman with a stamp, and I pretended to have a dizzy spell and had to lie down. Another time Tom slid a paper across the breakfast table alongside a plate of pancakes and said, "Just sign this so we can get the medical bills covered, sis." I squinted at the text, let my fork clatter, and said I needed my reading glasses, which I'd left in the car, and by the time I fumbled out to retrieve them, they had removed the document. I never outright refused. I just delayed. I was a broken old woman, a pitiful creature, and I let them believe it. When Vanessa suggested that I move into the farmhouse's east wing so they could take care of me and save on my condo rent, I agreed after only a token protest. I knew it was a tactic to keep me under surveillance, but it also placed me exactly where I needed to be, inside the lion's den with full access to their comings and goings. I packed my essentials, the clothes, the cleaning supplies, the small lockpicking tools wrapped in an old cloth, the camera, and I moved into the 3 rooms Claire had lovingly furnished for me years ago, a bedroom with a quilt she'd sewed, a sitting room with a window seat, and a tiny bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Tom and Vanessa gave me a key to the main house, a thin brass key, and immediately began treating me like a child, checking on me at odd hours, listening at doors, commenting on when I went to bed and when I woke up. I let them. I smiled vacantly, asked repetitive questions about where the sugar was kept, and shuffled around in slippers. I was busy being a ghost. The first week I simply observed. I sat in my wing's small parlor with a book, the door cracked open, and cataloged their habits. Tom spent hours on his laptop in the wood-paneled office off the living room, the door closed, his voice muffled and tense. Often I heard him on the phone with someone, his tone shifting from sharp and pleading to defeated and desperate, followed by periods of frantic whispering with Vanessa. She took calls on the back porch, and I caught snatches of phrases like balloon payment, extension denied, the developer won't wait, and closing is set for the 15th. They were hemorrhaging money. A new black Escalade appeared in the driveway one morning, the temporary tag still in the window, and then a jet ski on a trailer that sat unused, and Vanessa started wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light whenever she gestured dismissively toward me. She talked about a trip to Cancun, about new kitchen cabinets, about how the market was turning and they just needed to clear this little legal snag. I kept my expression bland and asked no questions. The breakthrough came on a Saturday when the kitchen sink drain clogged completely, a mess of coffee grounds, eggshells, and grease, backing up gray water that spilled across the tile. Vanessa shrieked and jumped back as if attacked. Tom stood over the sink with a plunger, dripping sweat and accomplishing nothing but compacting the clog further. I walked in and said quietly, "I can fix that." They both stared, Vanessa with disbelief, Tom with that particular irritation of a man being shown up by a woman twice his age. I fetched a pipe wrench and a bucket from my own supply kit in the East Wing, a kit I had kept since my cleaning business days when I often handled minor plumbing for elderly clients who couldn't afford a plumber. I dropped to my knees on the wet tile, placed the bucket under the trap, and loosened the slip nuts. Water and sludge poured out. I disconnected the P-trap, pulled out a wad of hardened grease, a forgotten dishcloth, and a small plastic army soldier that had probably been in there for a decade, and I had the water running clear in 20 minutes. I cleaned the trap, reassembled it, ran the water, and turned to them with my hands still wet. Tom's face cycled through shock, resentment, and then a calculating interest. "Didn't know you were handy, Helen." I wiped my hands on a rag and said, "I'm full of surprises." That small incident shifted something. They began to underestimate me even more, seeing me as a simple working-class woman who knew her place, a plumber in a cardigan, and I used that invisibility to move around the house with greater freedom. A few days later, while Tom and Vanessa were at a dinner meeting, with someone I later learned was a land developer named Grayson, I slipped into the office. The filing cabinet was locked, a basic 2-drawer Hahn model with a wafer lock. I recognized it instantly because my Uncle Ed ran a locksmith shop when I was a teenager, Ed's safe and key over on Baxter Avenue, and I spent 2 summers keying blanks, cutting keys, and repinning cylinders. I hated it at the time, the oil under my nails, the smell of brass shavings, but now it was a gift. I went back to my wing, retrieved a small tension wrench and a rake pick from a tool roll I had never thrown away, tucked into the bottom of my cleaning kit, and returned to the cabinet. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied light clockwise torque, and then scrubbed the pins with the rake, lifting them one by one until I felt the soft give of the plug turning. The lock turned in under 30 seconds. I opened the drawer and found a mess of papers, many of them shredded in a crosscut shredder but hastily left in the bottom of the drawer rather than disposed of properly, as if someone had been interrupted. Envelopes, sticky notes, and a smell of stale coffee. I gathered every scrap into a plastic grocery bag, locked the cabinet again, and retreated to my room. That night, I pieced the puzzle together on my bed. Using tweezers and a roll of Scotch tape, I reconstructed the shredded documents. The first was a uniform residential loan application for a cash-out refinance on the farm property, dated 3 months before Claire's death. It pulled $200,000 in equity, cashing out the value Claire and I had worked so hard to preserve, at a variable rate that would have been usurious. The borrower's signature was Tom's, but there was another document, a waiver of my life estate purportedly signed by Helen O'Mara, notarized by a notary named Denise K. Porter with a stamp whose embossing looked slightly off, the state seal blurred. My signature was forged, a poor imitation that looped the wrong way on the H and misspelled my middle initial. I stared at it and felt a cold, clarifying anger, the kind that settles in your stomach and makes everything sharp. They had already sold the farm out from under me, and the developer's purchase agreement, a 15-page contract with exhibits, was dated just last week and listed a closing date in 10 days. Tom was finalizing the sale and planned to evict me with a $10,000 check and a 30-day notice, a payoff so insulting it was almost a joke. Tucked in the back of the drawer, I also found a predatory loan agreement, a short-term bridge loan with a 30% annual interest rate and a balloon payment due in 6 months, secured by the farm's remaining equity. The lender was a private capital group out of Indianapolis that specialized in hard money loans, and the covenants were brutal. A prepayment penalty, a cross-default clause, and a confession of judgment tucked into the fine print. Tom and Vanessa were drowning, and they planned to use my life estate as a flotation device by simply erasing it from the record. Claire's camera became my most valuable tool. I set it on a bookshelf aimed at the office whenever I could, a slim black rectangle almost invisible among a row of dusty encyclopedias, and it captured Tom discussing the closing with Vanessa in low, urgent tones. "She's not signing. We'll just push through with the notary Denise found. Grayson's title company is the one on River Road. They're not going to dig too hard. Once the sale closes, we'll serve her the eviction and she'll be out before she can file anything." Vanessa replied, "What about the contract her lawyer filed? That life estate thing?" Tom laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "That was years ago. Nobody's checking the county records from 5 years back." By the time her little lawyer figures it out, we'll be in Florida. The camera captured it all, the timestamps burned into the video file. I copied every document with my phone, photographed each reconstructed shred, and backed everything up to a cloud account and to a USB drive I wore on a cord around my neck under my blouse. But I still needed an ally, someone on the outside who could translate this mess into actionable justice and who could confirm that Claire's safeguards were still in place. I found her in a way that felt almost orchestrated by Claire's ghost. The week after my discovery, I visited the community bank branch in town, a small brick building on Main Street with a row of teller windows and a smell of old paper and floor wax. I had kept my modest checking account there for 30 years, ever since I opened it with my first dental hygienist paycheck. I asked to speak with someone about the life estate and the original mortgage payoff, and the teller, a young woman with a kind face, referred me to a senior compliance officer named Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson was a sharp, gray-haired woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a desk piled with regulation manuals, and she had the calm, unhurried authority of someone who had seen every kind of financial fraud. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the basics, her fingers steepled, and then she closed her office door and said, "Helen, your sister came to me 18 months ago. She was very deliberate. She established a safe deposit box with a biometric lock, keyed to your fingerprint and a physical key that only you possess. She also deposited a flash drive containing a recorded video statement, a notarized copy of Tom's contract with you, and a certified copy of the life estate filing with the county. I am authorized to access that box only upon your direct request or upon notification of a legal challenge to the property title. It's a dead man's switch of sorts. If anyone tries to sell the property without your consent, the title company is required to do a title search, and that search will flag a notice of pendency that Claire and I filed with the county recorder's office. It's called a lis pendens. It clouds the title, notifies all potential buyers that there's a pending legal interest, and makes a clean sale impossible without your notarized signature and a recorded release. I'm honestly surprised a developer would proceed, unless they're using a title company that's either incompetent or complicit. I stared at her, my throat tight and my eyes stinging. So the sale can't close without me. Not legally, Mrs. Patterson said. But if they forge your signature and find a dirty title company, they might attempt a quiet closing and flip the property quickly before the fraud is discovered. That's why we need more evidence. Do you have any recordings? I nodded and told her about the camera, the forged waiver, the refinanced documents, the shredded bridge loan. She listened, made notes, and then reached into a drawer and handed me a tiny USB device, a keylogger, about the size of a thumbnail. This is a hardware-based keystroke capture tool. If you can plug it into Tom's laptop for 15 minutes, it will record every keystroke and save it to an encrypted file. We can use that to document his coordination with the developer and the notary. But you have to be careful. Don't get caught. I took it, my heart hammering. That evening, while Tom and Vanessa were on the back porch arguing loudly about a missed car payment, their voices sharp and bouncing off the barn, I slipped into the office. The laptop was closed, but it was not locked. I opened it, logged in by clicking his user profile, and waited for the desktop to load. The screensaver was a photo of a sailboat. I inserted the keylogger into a USB port, tucked it behind the screen, and then occupied myself with dusting the bookshelf while the device blinked a tiny green light. 14 minutes later, I retrieved it, logged out, and closed the laptop. My hands were steady, but my pulse was a drum in my ears. The keylogger captured a trove of emails and instant messages showing clear coordination with the developer, including a message from Tom to Grayson that read, "Don't worry about the title cloud. Denise will provide a notary statement that the waiver was signed in her presence. She just needs the cash." Another message showed the routing information for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a numbered account with a 7-figure balance that Tom had been siphoning from the refinance proceeds. Mrs. Patterson confirmed the interception had occurred legally under a bank fraud investigation, since the predicate loan involved federally insured funds, and the fraud originated in a transaction tied to a regulated institution. She then alerted a federal investigator specialized in elder financial abuse, a calm, meticulous man named Agent Miller, who met me in Mrs. Patterson's office 3 days later. He was tall, wore a plain suit, and had the kind of careful, quiet voice that made you feel safe. He explained that they would coordinate a sting, that the closing would be allowed to proceed to the signing table, and that I would be the trigger. "You don't have to be frightened, Helen. You're not alone in this. Your sister gave you a script. We'll be right outside." With the trap set, I needed to test Tom and Vanessa's last shred of humanity. The schema misses. Patterson and Agent Miller outlined required a clear demonstration of elder neglect to bolster the abuse charge, and honestly, I wanted to see for myself if there was anything left in them worth mourning. So I staged a collapse. I waited for an afternoon when I knew they were both home, a Thursday when Vanessa's real estate showings had been canceled, and Tom was pacing the living room with his phone, the closing only 3 days away. I took a dose of an over-the-counter motion sickness pill, the kind that makes you drowsy and unsteady, and I waited 30 minutes until I felt the familiar swimmy dizziness. Then I walked into the kitchen, put a hand on the counter, and let my knees buckle. I made it realistic. A loud gasp, a clatter of a knocked-over stool, and I sank to the floor in a heap, my cheek pressed against the cold tile, one arm twisted under me. I lay there, my breathing shallow, watching through barely slitted eyes. Tom came through the back door, saw me, and stopped. His face registered annoyance first, a flash of irritation that I was an inconvenience. Then he actually stepped over my legs, one foot carefully avoiding my hip, to grab a manila folder from the kitchen island. He muttered, "Not now, Helen, I've got a closing at 3, and walked right out, the screen door slapping behind him. I heard the escalade start. Vanessa drifted in a moment later, phone pressed to her ear, her heels clicking on the tile. She glanced down at me, said without breaking her conversation, "You're fine, get up," and continued describing a countertop renovation to someone on the other end. She stepped around me and poured herself a glass of water from the filter pitcher, then walked out. I lay there for 10 more minutes, the cold seeping into my bones, and then I stood, brushed myself off, and felt the last warm, lingering thread of family loyalty inside me go cold and rigid as rebar. They would have let me die on that floor if it meant they could keep their money. I was nothing but an obstacle, a breathing signature they needed to circumvent. That night, I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a person who has closed a door forever. The morning of the closing arrived dry and bright, a pristine October day that smelled of wood smoke and cut grass. Tom and Vanessa dressed me in a clean blouse they'd bought for the occasion, a pale blue thing with little pearl buttons that I despised, told me it was for your new cottage pictures, and drove me to a title company office in a strip mall near the interstate. The office was generic and beige, with motivational posters of eagles and a coffee machine that gurgled in the corner. The developer's closing agent, a thin man in an expensive suit named Mr. Duval, spread documents across a conference table, and Tom slid a check for $10,000 toward me with a rehearsed smile. "A gift for your fresh start," he said. Vanessa placed a pen in my hand, a heavy silver pen, and pointed to a signature line on a document labeled Voluntary Surrender of Life Estate and Quitclaim Deed. They all watched me, waiting, their breathing shallow. I set the pen down. I said very quietly, but with absolute clarity, "You can forge my signature on a refinancing application, but you can't forge my presence here. You just brought me into a room filled with witnesses and a notary who has no idea what you've been doing. I'm not signing anything." Tom's face went purple. Vanessa hissed, "Don't be difficult, Helen. You'll be out on the street." Mr. Duval's expression flickered from confusion to alarm. I reached into my purse, a sturdy leather bag I'd had for a decade, and withdrew Claire's digital camera. I held it up. "This is a motion-activated camera that Claire gave me. It's been recording, and I have evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. But first, let me show you something." I plugged the USB adapter into the conference room's media hub, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Claire's face appeared, alive and earnest, sitting at this same bank's conference table with Mrs. Patterson beside her. She looked into the lens and said, "My name is Claire Aldridge, and this is my statement regarding the farm property and the life estate held by my sister Helen O'Mara. Her signature and presence are required for any transfer, and any attempt to circumvent this will trigger an automatic notification to the bank and county recorder. This recording is legally binding, and copies have been filed with the county, the bank, and an attorney. If you are watching this and Helen is not signing willingly, you are witnessing a fraud." Then the screen switched to the footage I had taken, Tom's voice discussing the forged notary, the payoffs, the plan to evict me. The closing agent, Mr. Duval, recoiled as if burned. Grayson, the developer who had been silent in the corner, began gathering papers, his face blanching. "This is a misrepresentation. I want no part of this." Tom lunged for the camera, but at that exact moment, the conference room door opened and Mrs. Patterson stepped in, flanked by Agent Miller and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. Agent Miller held up a warrant and said, "Tom Aldridge, you're under arrest for real estate fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. Vanessa, you're also being charged as an accomplice." Vanessa tried to bolt for the door and found it blocked by a deputy, her face contorting into something ugly and desperate. Tom was handcuffed, his bravado crumbling into a red-faced, sputtering mess of threats and denials that no one was listening to. The $10,000 check lay on the table like a dead leaf. The closing was terminated on the spot, and the sheriff's office placed a lien on the property pending the investigation. I stood quietly, the camera still in my hand, and watched them being let out. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. I felt exhaustion and relief and the deep, quiet presence of my sister in that room. The legal aftermath was swift and methodical. Tom's plea deal, hammered out over 2 months, included 18 months in federal prison, full restitution to me of the $95,000, which I received in a lump sum from his drained offshore account, and the full voiding of the fraudulent sale. Vanessa pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received probation with a permanent ban from real estate licensing and a steep fine. The developer, spooked by the title cloud and the fraud exposure, dropped all claims and returned the earnest money to his own investors, and he later sued Tom for damages. I filed a quiet title action in circuit court, and within 6 weeks I was granted sole ownership of the farm, free and clear, with Claire's estate passing to me exactly as our contract intended. I received her safe deposit box key through probate, a small brass key on a chain, and I went to the bank alone on a Tuesday morning. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner, turned the key, and opened the box. Inside was a flash drive with the video I'd already seen, a copy of the contract, and a photograph of us as girls, arms linked, sunburned, holding a string of fish at a lake. Taped to the back was a note in Claire's handwriting. "I always knew you'd be the one to fix it. Thank you for teaching me to balance the checkbook. I love you forever." I sat in the vault and cried for an hour, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you can't stop it. And then I dried my eyes and walked out into the sunlight. Then I got practical. To offset the depletion of my savings and generate income from 40 acres I would never farm myself, I leased the back pasture to a local agritourism company called Harvest Days LLC, which was expanding its pumpkin patch operations. I negotiated the lease myself, with a lawyer reviewing the terms, and I had one non-negotiable condition: the name. I insisted, and they agreed after I explained the story to the owner, a jovial man named Paul who appreciated a good branding opportunity, to call the fall attraction Gourd of Deceit. They built a bright orange stand shaped like a giant pumpkin, a petting zoo with goats and a miniature donkey, a hay maze that spelled out, "Trust no one" if you looked at it from the hill, and a small coffee kiosk that served seasonal drinks like forgery freeze and pumpkin spite latte. And as part of the civil judgment against Tom, I incorporated a creative restitution clause. Once he was released from prison, destitute and unhirable after a very public fraud conviction, his probation conditions required stable employment. I offered the court a solution. Tom would work the pumpkin patch's cash register every day of the fall season, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, wearing a full scarecrow costume with a burlap shirt, floppy hat, patched overalls, and straw poking from the cuffs and collar. Pinned to his chest, laminated in plastic, is a badge that reads "Financially Plowed." The county probation office monitors his compliance. When customers ask about the badge, I sometimes tell them the abridged story, and most of them buy an extra pie and take a selfie with him. The humiliation is quiet, steady, and perfectly legal. I drive by sometimes just to watch him slap a lid on a latte, his face a thundercloud behind the burlap, and it never fails to make me smile. I spend my mornings on the farmhouse porch with a cup of strong coffee, watching the mist lift off the pumpkin field. The east wing is mine entirely now, and I've renovated the kitchen with a deep farm sink and new cabinets, planted Claire's favorite pale pink peonies along the fence, and turned Tom's old office into a bright reading room with a window seat where I read her old books. I can walk into town and not a single person looks at me with pity. I'm not the victim. I'm the owner. Claire's final gift was not the property. It was the lesson that when someone shows you they value a check over your life, you owe them nothing but the full, patient application of the law. I still miss her every day, but I protect her home the way she protected me when she hid that little gray box in the attic. I imagine her sometimes, standing in the garden, smiling at the sign that says Gourd of Deceit and laughing that bright, unguarded laugh of hers. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. If this story reminded you that being underestimated can be the most powerful weapon of all, please hit like and subscribe for more real-life tales of justice and resilience. I'll see you in the next one.